Sechas Yevamos Daf concludes the first parak of the Masechta with a discussion of certain villages or towns that had a majority of mamzerim or were suspected of being mamzerim. It wasn't clear if the residents there were nachrim or mamzerim. The Gemara will discuss whether or not that is a problem for the rest of Klal Yisrael. The Gemara, we will then move on to the second parak of the Masechta, which begins with the topic of an Eishes Ach Shelo Haya Ba'alama, and the Mishnah will explain how that works. So let's begin the last few lines. On Daf Tes Zayin, the Gemara says, Rav Yehuda said name of Ravasi, that if a Nachri is Mekadesh, that is betrothed a Jewish woman, we have to be afraid that that is good Kedushin, even though there is no Tfisas Kedushin, there is no taking hold of marriage between a Nachri and a Yisrael. We have to be concerned that this Nachri is actually from the 10 lost tribes, from the Aseres HaShvatim. So the Gemara asks, why would that be? We have a rule, whenever somebody leaves a mixture, he's considered to be from the majority. The majority of the people of the world are definitely not Jews. So Gemara says, we're talking about a place where it's known that there's a lot of Aseres HaShvatim living there, and somebody goes to there, and therefore they are in their place, and we have a rule called Kol Kavua Kamechza Amechza Dami. If you know that there is an established minority, at least, of a certain thing in a mixture, and you go to there and take one out or choose one, then it's assumed to be 50-50. And therefore you cannot go with the majority rule. You have to be concerned that it's from the minority, and therefore maybe this person is from the Aseres HaShvatim. So now the Gemara says, what is the type of place that has a mixture of Aseres HaShvatim living there in a large official percentage? So the Gemara quotes Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana, who says that it's based on a pasuk which says, Vayegel Melech Ashur es Yisrael, the king of Ashur exiled Yisrael, Ashura, to Ashur, Vayanchem, and he brought them Bachlach, V'chavar, Hargozin, V'ori Modeh. So you have four places here. Chalach is a place called Chilazon. Chavor is a place called Chadaib. Nahar Gozen is a place called Ginzak, and the cities of Modai is Chemdon and its suburbs. And some say it's Niher and its suburbs. The Gemara says, what are the suburbs of Niher? The Gemara says that is the village of the Moshchei Chidki. And it's also the village of Dumkaya. Alright, now the Gemara says that Rav Yochanan went and he said this entire sugya here, this halacha, that you have to be concerned that the kedushin of a nachri is a good kedushin if there is an established presence of Aseres HaShvatim there. He went and he said this over to Shmuel, and Shmuel rejected it. Shmuel said you don't have to be concerned for it, and there's two versions as to what his reason was. The first is that he says as follows: you don't have to be concerned because the halacha is that a descendant, that a child of a marriage between a Yisrael and a Nachri, if the father is a Yisrael and the mother is a Nachri, then the child has the halacha of a Nachri. We learned that from the pasuk in Dvarim, which says Ki Yasir es bin chol me'acharai. It says you should not marry your children off to a Nachri, because what's going to happen is that the Nachri father will take your grandson and move him away from me. So that clearly indicates that we're talking about a situation where the father of this grandchild is a Nachri and the mother is a Yisrael. And there we have concern that your grandchild, who is really a Yisrael, will be moved, will be turned away, and will be taught Nachri religions by his father, who is a Nachri. So this shows the only circumstance in which you need to worry about your grandson, who's a Yisrael, not keeping Torah, is if his mother was Jewish and his father was a Nachri. If, however, the reverse is true, that is, his mother was a Nachri and his father was Jewish, he would not be Jewish himself. He would be considered a Nachri l'halacha, and therefore we're not concerned. We will not call him a bincha. We will not call him your son, and therefore it's not going to be an issue. So we see from here clearly the halacha is that the establishment of Jewish lineage is matrilineal descent. It goes through the mother, not through the father. So says the Gemara, the Shmuel says, therefore you don't have to worry about the case. You don't have to be concerned about the Aseres HaShvatim that are mixed into these cities and nations, because they are all considered to be non-Jews, because their fathers are not Jews. So the Gemara asks the obvious question, what about the women of the Aseres HaShvatim? Their children will be Jewish, so if they had daughters and more daughters, they will be mixed into all these populations. They'll be Jews by yichus through their mothers. So the Gemara says, The answer to that is that the Jewish girls of the Aseret Shvatim who were mingled amongst the nations were all made to be akaros. They were all unable to give birth, and therefore none of them had any children. Therefore the lineage of all Jewishness in those mixtures all ended over there. Now the second version of what Shmuel said is that he said that when the Aseret Shvatim were sent into exile, the Chachamim got it together and put them in Chayrim, which means they removed them from Klal Yisrael, and they became considered to be goyim completely, and there is no possibility that any of their descendants are still Jewish because they were removed from the nation entirely. And that's learned from the fact that there was a pasuk in Hosea that says, "Ba'Hashem bagadu kivanim zarim yoladu." They rebelled against Hashem and they gave birth to non-Jewish, to foreign children, and that's to show that they are all completely considered to be non-Jews from here on in. Okay, now the Gemara continues the discussion of a city which is majority psulim, which has a lot of mamzerim in it. So the Gemara says Rav Kahana was sitting in front of Yehuda, and Rav Yosef was sitting behind Rav Kahana. And Rav Yehuda was sitting and he was saying the following halach. He was saying Kaisel in the future is going to make a Yom Tov on the day that the city of Tarmud is destroyed or becomes desolate and uninhabited. So Gemara asks, it was destroyed. And he says, no, Tarmud was not destroyed, the Talmud was destroyed. Different place. Rav Ashi says, no, it's the same place. Tarmud and Talmud is the same thing, but it was never completely destroyed. It was destroyed in pieces, and while one part was destroyed, the other part was built up. So if it was destroyed from the east, the west was expanded. If it was destroyed from the west, the east was expanded, but it was never completely charv, and therefore the city still exists, and its majority mamzerim, and therefore it's causing problems to Klal Yisrael, and when it ultimately be destroyed, then we won't have to worry about the presence of those mamzerim, and it will not pollute the gene pool. Okay, says the Gemara that Rav Hamnuna was sitting in front of Ula, and he was asking questions on a sugya. That is, Rav Hamnuna was asking Ula all kinds of kashas on the sugya that they were learning. And Ula was impressed, and he commented, how great is this Talmud Chacham? If not for the fact that he was from Harpania. If he wouldn't be from Harpania, it would be wonderful. So, it says Rav Hamnuna was embarrassed. He was from Harpania, and this was apparently a flaw. It was a pagam. They didn't have good yichus. Their genealogy was messed up, and therefore he could not be accepted. So the Gemara says that Ula saw that he was embarrassed and he consoled him and he said, where do you pay your taxes? Where do you pay your head tax? He said, I pay it to Pum Nahara. He said, if you pay it to Pum Nahara, then you're considered to be from Pum Nahara. You're not considered to be from Harpania, and we don't consider you to have questionable genealogy. The Gemara says, what's Harpania? What's wrong with it? So Rabbi Zera says its name comes from Har Ponin, from the mountain which everybody turns to. That was a village on a mountain, and anybody who didn't know who their parentage was would go there because all the mixtures of questionable arrangements came there, and all the people who were lost without a genealogy went there. And therefore it was a city that was a collection of people with questionable genealogy. Anybody who didn't know his family, didn't know his shevet, he went and hung out over there. Now, Rava says this place is worse than Gehenim. Why? Because Gehenim one can come up from, one can fix the pagam of being in Gehenim. Like it says in the pasuk, Miyad Sha'ol Efdeim, I will redeem them from the lowest levels. However, from Harpania one cannot get out because once someone has a psul yichus, there's nothing you can do to fix that. Now, he says, where does their psul come from? He says it's from the nearby city of Mishon, and their psulim went into Harpania. The psulim of Mishon come from the city of Tarmud, and psulim of Tarmud because the slaves of Shlomo HaMelech went there and married Benos Yisrael. Now, as an expression, to sum this up, the Gemara says that a large kav and a small kav both roll and they end up in Sha'ol. From Sha'ol they end up in Tarmud, from Tarmud they end up in Mishon, from Mishon they end up in Harpania. Large kav and a small kav means measures that are the wrong size, and therefore they're psulim. It's a euphemism for people that are psulim, and they move from place to place, Sha'ol to Tarmud, to Mishon, to Harpania, Sha'ol referring to Gehenim, but showing that it is higher than all these because it at least can be fixed. So this concludes the first parak. Now we begin the second parak, which discusses the halacha of Eishes Ach Shel Haya Ba'olamo. The Mishnah describes the concept of Eishes Ach Shel Haya Ba'olamo. The Gemara will have a linguistic question and then get to the source of the halacha. So what is Eishes Ach Shel Haya Ba'olamo? In its simplest term, Eishes Ach Shel Haya Ba'olamo means a brother that did not live at the same time as his brother. One was born after the death of the other one. So the Gemara describes the case as follows. You have to figure out how you have an Eishes Ach Shel Haya Ba'olamo and how she paters her tzara. So you have Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi. Ruvain and Shimon are born. They're both alive at the same time. Ruvain marries a woman. Ruvain dies without children, and that woman falls to Yibum before Shimon. Then Levi is born. Now this woman has an Isser to Levi. She has the potential to Yibum to Levi because she is the wife of Levi's brother Ruvain, who died without children. However, she is forbidden to do Yibum because Levi was never alive at the same time as Ruvain, and therefore she has the Isser Eishes Ach. So then what happens? So that's how you have, she is what's called an Eishes Achiv Shalhei Ba'alama. She's the wife of Ruvain, which is not in the same world as Levi. He died before Levi was born. Now, if Shimon then goes ahead and does Yibum with this woman, and Shimon has another wife, that wife is now the Tsaras Eishes Ach Shalhei Ba'alama. So if then Shimon dies without children, and both of them fall to Yibum to Levi, so the original wife of Ruvain is an Eishes Ach Shalhei Ba'alama. The second wife, the Tzara, is a Tzaras Eishes Ach Shalhei Ba'alama, and she is Pater for that reason from doing Yibum as well. Now, says the Gemara, what happens if Shimon never did a full-fledged Yibum? Shimon did Kiddushin with the Eishes Ach Shalhei Ba'alama, and then he died from Kiddushin. He did not get a chance to complete the Yibum process. He didn't have to do Kiddushin at all, but he did, and he didn't complete it. So there was a quasi-marriage between him and the Eishes Ach Shalhei Ba'alama. He did have a complete marriage, though, to the Tzara. So both of them fall to Yibum. So the Tzara falls to Yibum completely, and the Eishes Ach Shalhei Ba'alama falls to Yibum only in a quasi way. The Yibum from Ruvain is not a Yibum, and the Yibum from Shimon is quasi because she was only in a quasi marriage to Shimon. So the halacha is that the Tzara is a quasi Eishes Ach, is a quasi Tzaras Erva, and therefore she requires Chalitza. And she is not allowed to do Yibum. She can't do Yibum because she does have a quasi Tzaras Erva status. She's not allowed to. She has to do Chalitza because she does not have a complete Tzaras Erva status because the Erva in this case was only Kiddushin to the brother without actual Yibum. It wasn't a complete marriage. Okay, now the Gemara begins, and it notes that when the Mishnah discusses the two women, it refers to one of them as the first wife and one of them as the second wife. This is referring to the two women who are married to Shimon at some point, one that he married on his own and one that he received through Yibum from Ruvain. The Mishnah calls one the first wife and one the second wife. Says the Gemara, there are two versions of this Mishnah as to which one's called the first wife and which one's called the second wife. And the Gemara says both are correct, both are explainable. If Ruvain's wife, who later falls to Yibum to Shimon, if she is called the first wife, so that's not a problem, because she is the first one to fall to Yibum. She fell to Yibum from Ruvain before the Tzara fell to Yibum from Shimon. She fell to Yibum a second time, but she fell to Yibum first. So she's called first one because she's the first one to fall to Yibum. The Tzara is called second because she's the second one to fall to Yibum. Now if you switch it and say that Reuben's wife is called the second, that's not a problem because she was the second one to marry Shimon. The Tzara married Shimon first, and then she married Shimon second when she fell to him from Yibum from the death of Reuven. Says Gemara, hold on a second, but what if she didn't marry Shimon second? What if she fell to Yibum to Shimon first, and Shimon married her, and then Shimon went and took a second wife? The same halacha would apply. She's still a Tzaras Eishes Ach Shalhei Ba'alama. So Gemara says, okay, I have to give you a different reason that she's called the second. She would be called the second because she was the one who was married twice. She was married to the first one, she's married to the second one, so it's her second marriage, therefore she's called the second one. Okay, now the Gemara goes looking for the source of the halacha of Eishes Ach Shalhei Ba'alama. So, says the Gemara, Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, it's very simply, the pasuk describes Yibum by saying, Ki yeshvu achim yachdav, when brothers will live together. Live together means they have to both be alive at the same time in order for the mitzvah of Yibum to occur. Now, there's another limiting factor to the scenario of Yibum, which the Gemara wants to learn from the same words, and that's that the brothers have to be brothers from the father. They have to share a father. It's not enough if they share a mother. We're also going to have to learn that it's enough if they only share a father and they don't have to share both a father and a mother. So the Gemara says that Rav Yehuda says that that's learned out of the fact that it says Yachdav, that they are together. What does that have to do with anything? Yachdav means that they're together in their inheritance. They both are receiving the same inheritance. Inheritance doesn't come from the mother, inheritance comes from the father. And therefore it has to be referring to two brothers who are brothers from the father, and therefore we see that the case of Yibum, the mitzvah of Yibum, only applies to brothers that are paternal brothers. Now, Rabbah says there's another way to learn that, and that's the fact that the pasuk says Achim. Right? It says ki yeshu achem yachdav. Rabbi Yehuda is focusing on the yachdav. He says it's achem. The word achem occurs elsewhere. Achem also applies in the description of the Shvatim, the children of Yaakov. They call themselves achem, as in when they say shneim aser anachnu achem b'nei avinu. So there it clearly says that achem means sharing a father, b'nei avinu, sons of a father. Here also achem has to be referring to sons of the father. But so not so fast. You have a very similar word where it's discussing sons of the mother, and that's in the mitzvah in the Isser of Arayos. The Torah describes it as ervas eshes achicha. Is one of the examples. So there, achem achicha, a very similar word. It both means brotherhood, and there it applies to a brother from the mother only as well. So perhaps I should learn from there that Yibam also only applies to a brother from the mother. How do I see that it applies to a brother from the father? That you have two sources. You want to learn from the word achem. The word achem exists in Bnei Yaakov, where it's a brother from the father. It also exists in discussing arayos, which could also be a brother from the mother. So Gemara says, no, when I have two things to learn, I want to learn from the one which is most similar. Here is the word that's used is achim. By Bnei Yaakov, the word that's used is also achim. By arayos, the word that's used is achicha. I always go with the most similar word. We see that elsewhere. We see that in a brisa discussing the halachos of tzaras of a house. And there's a drasha there based on the phrase which says the kohen will come. In one place it says V'shava Kohen, in one case it says Ubaha Kohen. Similar meaning but different word. And the Gemara there says that I'll use the drasha, you'll be able to learn one from the other if there's no more similar word. Here, however, you have a more similar word. You have Achem and Achem. That's a better limud than Achem to Achicha. The Gemara says, okay, but if you're learning from the word Achem, there's another halacha you could learn out of the word Achem, which is not true, and why don't we learn that? And that is there mitzvah of Yibam if a father's brother dies without children. So far we've seen only if one's actual brother dies without children. What if one's father's brother dies without kids? There's no mitzvah even. But why don't we learn that? Because Lot and Avram describe themselves as brothers. It says, Ki Anoshim Achim Anachnu. And Avram was Lot's father's brother. So if the term Achim applies to that, then you should also have a mitzvah of Yibam. Learn from here where it says, Ki Yeshu Achim Yachdav. It should also have the mitzvah of Yibam to the father's brother. So the Gemara says, no, we're not going to do that. We're only going to learn from the Bnei Yaakov, because over there the term Achim is extra. They did not have to say the word Achim. They could have just said, Shneim Asar Anachnu Avadim, Bnei Avinu. Didn't have to say Achim. It's extra, and therefore it's to teach us that in our pasuk describing Yibam, where it says, Ki Yeshu Achim Yachdav, it's referring to a similar situation, brothers from the father. It's not referring to a case like Lot and Avram. Okay, now the Gemara goes into this a bit more deeply. The Gemara says, according to what we're saying here, we have two sources for the halacha that a brother, as far as Yibam is concerned, is a paternal brother. One is from the word yachdav, which means they share an inheritance, and one is from the word achim. It says the Gemara, you need both of those. If you would only have the word achim, and it wouldn't say yachdav, then I would learn from Lot that it applies to a father's brother as well. Now, I just said that I'm going to learn from the Shvatim, because there the word is extra. Well, the truth is that by Lot, I could also potentially argue that the word is extra. They didn't have to say Ki Anoshim Achem Anachnu. They could have said Ki Anoshim Reim Anachnu. We are friends. The fact that it says Achem is extra, and it could be therefore teaching us that the mitzvah Yibam applies in a situation of an uncle as well. Therefore, we had to say the word Yachdav. Yachdav says they have to actually be sharing an inheritance. Now, an uncle and a nephew are close relatives, but they don't share an inheritance because they don't share a father. Now, therefore I had to have the word Yachdav. Achim is not enough. If I had only the word Yachdav, so then I would think that they have to be very close together. They have to be exactly similar, and they have to share both a mother and a father. In order to teach me that they only have to share a father, we need the word Achim to spread it also to a case like Bnei Yaakov, where they only share a mother, where they share only a father, and they did not all share the same mother, yet all 12 are called Achim. So says, now why in the world would I think that they have to share a mother? Yachdav, we said, means that they share an inheritance. Sharing an inheritance has nothing to do with the mother. Somewhere says, no, you think that because the whole mitzvah of Yibam is a chiddush. It goes against the halachas we know thus far, which is that Eishes Ach should be aser. Here we're saying it's mutter. And our rule is whenever you have a chiddush, you try to apply it in the most minimum set of scenarios. So we would say it only applies in a case where they share a mother and a father, not in a case where they share just a father. Okay, we now switch gears and talk about the topic of Zika. Zika, again, is the connection between a woman who's falling to Yibum and the brothers to whom she falls to Yibum. And the question is, what is the strength of this Zika relationship? It is considered, it's viewed midrabanan as a connection that's similar to marriage. The question is, does it create isurim on the relatives? That is, if Rachel's falling to Yibum to Shimon, if she only is falling to Yibum, that means there's a Zika connection. Is it usher for Shimon to marry Rachel's mother or her sister or any of the other people that are related to her? Is the Zika connection viewed like a marriage? So this is a machlokes in other circumstances, and the Gemara is going to discuss people here who weigh in on one or other side of the subject. Now, our Gemara quotes Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda, who seem to weigh in on this machlokes, and the Gemara, of course, will ask, why are they saying their own machlokes? Why don't they just say that they hold like one or the other opinion? So the case that they're discussing is if a woman falls to Yibum, let's say Rachel falls to Yibum to Shimon, and Rachel dies before there is a chance to do Yibum, is Shimon allowed to marry Rachel's mother? This is the mother of his skukaso who died. She's not alive any longer. So what's the halacha there? Is there a Zika or not? Now, had it been his wife, you can't marry one's wife's mother even after the wife has died. Question though is, can he marry his Zikuka's mother after she died? So the Gemara says, as follows: Rav Huna says that there is no strong Zika to that extent, and he is allowed to marry his Zikuka's mother after she dies. So the Gemara, of course, asks, why doesn't he just say that the halacha is like the opinion that says there is no Zika to Aser? It's not considered to be a marriage connection. So he says, no, he couldn't say that the halacha is like that, because that case, that machlokes between Rav Yehuda ben Pseira and the Chachamim is where there were two Yevamos, and therefore was a split Zika and was a weak Zika. If he would just say that that doesn't count, you wouldn't see that that doesn't count in a case where he's the only Yavam, and therefore he spoke about the case where he's the only Yavam, you want to say that that counts as well. So Gemara says, well, what do you mean? There is an opinion that says that that doesn't count either. Rabbi Akiva holds that a Yavam cannot be mefer neder, cannot cancel the vows of his zekuka, even if he is a very strong zika, and he is the only brother. He still does not have enough of a strong connection to cancel her vows. So why doesn't just say he holds like that? Versus if you say you hold like that, then you would think that there is no Zika connection at all, and even while the Yevama is alive, Shimon's allowed to marry her mother. That's not true. And the reason that's not true is because if Shimon would go marry her mother while she's alive, the mitzvah of Yibum would be canceled. Once it already began, you would chop in half that Yibum, because you can't do Yibum anymore, because now this woman's the daughter of his wife. He's married to her mother. We wouldn't allow that. You cannot cancel a Yibum once it's already begun. Once you already fell to Yibum, you can't go marry her relative and get rid of the mitzvah of Yibum. Therefore, to that extent, there is a Zika, and therefore that's Asar. The only thing you wanted to say was that while she's, that after she died, you're allowed to marry her mother because there is no Isser of the mother of his Zikuka. Now, the Gemara goes to a very similar exchange in the opinion of Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda holds that Shimon is not allowed to marry his Zekuka's mother even after she dies. It means Rav Yehuda holds there is a Zika connection that is strong like a marriage. So Gemara says, why doesn't he just say that he holds like the one who says Yesh Zika? Gemara says, if you would say that, then you would think that's only where there is one brother. You wouldn't know that that's true, even if there are two brothers and it's a weak Zika. The Gemara says, what do you mean? They were arguing in the case of two brothers where there's a weak Zika. The Gemara says, okay, what I meant to say is that I wouldn't know that that is true after she died. That's only in the case of when she's alive. I may think that's when it's Asr. How do you know that Isser applies even after she died? Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda has to spell it out. All right, now the Gemara wants to bring a proof to one side or the other. So the Gemara has a Mishnah that says that if one's Yevama dies, so let's say Shimon had Rachel falling him to Ibum, Shimon's allowed to marry her sister. Now that implies only her sister and not her mother. The reason there's a difference is because one is allowed to marry even his wife's sister after his wife dies. Certainly allowed to marry his Yevama's sister after his Yevama dies. That's for sure. But the implication here is only the sister, because there is no Isser. But you cannot marry the mother, just like you would not be able to marry his wife's mother after his wife dies. So the Gemara says, no. I'll tell you that he would be permitted to marry his mother. The only reason it says here sister is because this is the end of a Mishnah, and in the first part of the Mishnah, it specifically had to talk about the sister. The beginning of the Mishnah had said the halacha that one is allowed to marry his wife's sister after his wife dies. There you had to say sister, you couldn't say mother, because it's not true. You can't marry your wife's mother after your wife dies. And that's because the beginning said sister. Therefore the sefer here, where it's talking about Yibum, Zika, also says sister, but it is not specific. There it's mutter even to marry the mother.